Dead on. I know this has been advertised as an hour, but I thought I'd try and keep it to half an hour, keep it short and sweet, and hopefully keep everybody engaged. Thank you very much for joining us, first and foremost, for our inaugural e-commerce teardown webinar. My name is Tom New. I'm one of the co-founders of Formisimo. As always, we'd love everyone to be as engaged and interested as possible, so feel free to tweet us at Formisimo or use the hashtag e-commerce teardown to ask us any questions that we'll come to at the end of the webinar. Now, as is traditional, start with a little introduction to who we are and what we do to get it out of the way, and then on to the interesting stuff. As I said, I'm the co-founder of Formisimo. We're an analytics product that analyzes what users do in online forms and checkouts. We were started in January of 2014, so we've been doing this as a live product for just over a year now. And as I'm sure you can imagine, as part of that, we look at forms and checkouts day in, day out. And we've spoken to a lot of people throughout their journey of improving those. So we've seen some of the best and worst of what online forms and checkouts have got to offer. Today, we're just going to focus on e-commerce, so almost exclusively checkouts, and try and give you as many tips and tricks based on what we've seen. Those of you who registered for the webinar, some of you were brave enough to offer up some of your websites for us to critique and offer suggestions for. Now, rather than just tearing into individuals, I've arranged the kind of tips and things we notice into kind of themes, and then hopefully given some practical tips on each of the themes. Now, before we get there, though, I think it's important to talk a bit about why this is important. And from the statistics that we have gathered so far, so it's over 2.5 billion bits of data, we know that 67% of people abandon a form or a checkout before getting to the end. So it's not just people that view a basket and have no intention whatsoever to complete the process. That's people that have actually started interacting with the form. And that's obviously a vast number of people that you're losing out on right at the very last point of a customer journey. I'm sure you would have done a lot of hard work getting a customer to that point in terms of marketing and the website, and it feels like a massive, massive waste to lose them right at the last minute. So it's a big problem, but one that's addressable. Now, in terms of e-commerce cart abandonment, $4 trillion worth of e-commerce baskets are abandoned every single year. And that is just an absolutely vast amount of value that's lost right at the very last hurdle. And a lot of that will be to do with a poorly designed checkout process. So, as I mentioned, I've grouped these into kind of themes. So the things we're going to talk about today that I noticed both from the submitted forms and stuff that we've written about and seen over the last year or so. The first one is top navigation. So what do I mean by this? So the idea is the checkout is kind of a separate process to the browsing and shopping journey itself. The checkout process is when people have added stuff into a basket and chosen to try and pay for that. Now, what that should mean is that you focus your user almost exclusively on completing the transaction itself and don't give them reasons to leave that process. However, that's not always the case. So one of the submitted websites that we have that we were given, called Season and Trends, as you can see, this is the point where I start the checkout, and they still have their top navigation there. So you can still get to almost any other part of the website, so home, about, specials, product, or contact us, even though you've clicked on go to checkout after viewing your basket. Now, this, as much as anything, pushes the rest of the page downwards, but it also gives me one or several reasons to exit this process and go back to browsing. And at the point where I've made the decision to buy something, I would contend that that's one of the worst things that you can do. There are a number of reasons why I might get distracted, I might run out of time, something else might come up, and I simply might leave before I actually complete the transaction itself. They weren't alone though, so this is a company that we've talked about, I've spoken about at events. Toys R Us has one of the most most confusing checkout processes I've ever seen. But the first thing to notice here is there's just an absolute ton of distraction at the top. It's more brightly colored. There's a lot to click on, none of which takes you any closer to transacting. Um, and even the best of the bunch get this wrong too. So Apple, even once you've put in your vastly expensive phone into your basket and gone to the checkout process, the top navigation still sits there inviting you to go and look at other stuff, which some might argue is a reason for them to add more stuff into the basket. But again, I have to stress that this is the point where you've already made the decision to check out. So some people that get this right, Maplin, who we did a recent teardown of that you can find at our blog. One of the things they get right, amongst many things actually, is completely stripping away the top navigation. As you can see, the visitor's attention is exclusively aimed at completing this process. Which I think is really, really good. Another company who are a Mancunian company who get this right are Boohoo. So again, you can see the top navigation is completely stripped out of the process, and the user's attention is just on completing this process. As you can see, I've picked out a rather nice onesie that I was thinking of buying. So a couple of tips to do with the top navigation and why it's a good idea. It means that all distractions are removed from that process. It also means that there's more confidence can be made in the purchasing process. So any sort of trust signals or reassurance that this is the checkout, you've made your decision, we're going through to the point where we're going to ask for payment and delivery details, can be made more prominent. And again, it completely removes any ambiguity about where the user is in the user journey. And as I've mentioned, it should be in one direction. Got a nice little picture of Harry Styles there. Any excuse. So the second point I wanted to make, and a theme that I picked out, is to do with progression bars, or in layman's term, letting a user know how far through the process they are once they start. So again, not picking on seasons and trends, but something that I noticed here is they've got, as a header of the box at the bottom, they've got step 1 and then an explanation of what that is. However, there's no indication of how many steps there are to the process, and I've got no idea how many there are. It could be 2 or 7 or 15. And the progress bar is a great way to reassure users that they're progressing through the checkout process, how far they've come through, and the direction in which they're going is very clearly laid out. So here are some others that I wasn't a fan of, mainly because from a directional point of view, or it wasn't exactly clear what you could click on in the progress bar or which direction you were going. So moving on, Very. I've kind of labeled this in orange because I think they get some things right. So as you notice, they don't have a top navigation bar, to go back to the first point, which I think is great. But in terms of progress bar, the reason why I like it is they're numbered, they're very clear. It's very clear what step you are on. However, the only thing I'd pick out with this is it's not clear the direction that you're going, apart from the numbers, and also knowing what is clickable. A company that does this well, though they do many other things not so well, is IKEA. So I think this is a fantastic example of a good progress bar. So it's highlighted the step that you're on, it's numbered, and there are also some directional cues to indicate where you're going. So some tips for progress bars. It should be a logical progression. So a numbered labels are a great way to achieve this. It also keeps you informed of your location, or should do. And also in terms of positioning, whatever navigation you have there, it should be below the primary and secondary navigation. So third tip, and this is the one where I could probably talk all day and all night, but I won't, and it's to do with validation and errors in online forms. Now, ideally, the best way to handle, well, let me put some context on this first. All users are going to make some mistakes. Well, not every user, but most users will probably make at least one mistake during the process of a checkout. Now, it's your responsibility as a brand and somebody inviting people to give you their money to try and make it as easy as possible. The best way to approach this is try and prevent them before they happen, and you can do this in 3 ways. So getting onto a sort of slightly more granular form level analysis here. So the first point is to make very clear and unambiguous labels. Have additional help text when it's needed or required, and be as forgiving as possible with what users enter and what you allow them to enter. So to come to step one. So this is one of my favorite ones to highlight because I see this everywhere. You're at the payment part of an online checkout and you see a label cardholder name. This is slightly ambiguous for me because I don't know whether or not this is asking for what appears on my bank statement, my full name, my given name, or what appears on my credit card. And I know from having spoken to people that have put together checkouts, the information that they need is the name as it appears on the credit card. So this is slightly ambiguous and might allow users to enter information here that then goes on to fail validation, and they'll therefore have to come back and change this information. And that's extra friction and frustration that you don't want to give users. So a simple way to do it is to change the label to name in brackets as it appears on card. It completely removes any sort of ambiguity and gives the user an exact understanding of what information is being required of them. The second point I made was about additional help text. So if you have any optional fields in your form, it's a good idea to explain why you're asking for that information. And ideally, you're asking for it to improve the customer's experience journey, post-sale experience. So a couple of good examples of this. The bottom one is from Amazon. Phone number is a required field, but its explanation of why they need it is really nice, I think. So it's basically, rather than framing it in the sense of we've got more customer data, it's brilliant, we can sell your phone number onto third parties and make loads of money, it's we want to deliver you these goods and give you the best possible service. So please supply us a number so we can call if there are any problems for using this address. And the above one too is some really nice explanation of why they're asking for that information. So the third point was to do with being forgiving with user inputs. And this is basically getting under the skin of your customers and accepting the fact that different people want to enter information in different ways. So the top one is an example of a UK postcode that usually, when you see it written down, would have a space between the 6 and the 5. However, some people may just be typing it out quickly and not include that space. Now, there is nothing wrong with this whatsoever. You should know how postcodes are usually formatted in your country or in your area, and be able to very quickly simply work out what they were intending to write and not tell the user that it's an invalid postcode where the numbers and the letters are exactly what make up my postcode. The same applies for phone numbers. So my autocomplete on my Chrome browser, because I've had to enter my number internationally so often, the autocomplete sets it as a +44 or a +1 or whatever your country code might be. Now, this isn't an invalid way to enter data. So telling your users that it is can be incredibly frustrating. Again, it's to do with putting a little bit more development time into accepting this as a valid phone number. Equally, other ways people could enter numbers, phone numbers might be with brackets in, spaces without spaces. It's important to be as forgiving as possible to reduce the number of, in inverted commas, errors that your users makes. But if you cannot prevent them, which is inevitable, given the human condition, we're all prone to make mistakes occasionally. The feedback you give people when they get stuff wrong is really, really important for making a customer journey as good as possible. So, first point here is be helpful. So, what did I do wrong? Tell me what I did wrong so that I know how to correct it. And one of the first things I do when I'm looking at one of our clients' forms and checkouts is I don't type in anything and I try and submit it. And that immediately gives me a really good raft of information about how they handle errors. So this form that was submitted by one of the attendees today simply just displays a red box. around the field. So there's literally no information. It's not, in this instance, it should tell me that I haven't entered any information there whatsoever, but it hasn't told me that. It hasn't told me that I shouldn't enter spaces, or there appears to be some letters in my phone number. Can I please check them again? There's literally no help here at all. These are two that almost get it right, but don't. I think they're probably just a slight lack of development attention here. So the first one's from IKEA, which I told you did some stuff right earlier, but here's something that they definitely get wrong. Now, these are two password fields that they've had to enter to set up an account for to register to buy from them. And it simply says, please enter a username or password. Now, the field tells me that this is a password field. So why are you telling me that I should enter a username, having got it wrong in the first instance? Both of which I think these are pretty confusing. The bottom one's even worse, right? So that is, well, it's almost English, but it's obviously a bit of code has been spat out there telling me that the landline phone number has not been accepted. But that's just not English. That's not the way you would speak to someone in real life. So it shouldn't be the way that you express the fact that a user has made a mistake in your forms either. So where did I go wrong? Just to quickly go back to this. This is something that, well, I see less of now, but I still see, as we'll see in a minute. Tell me where I went wrong. So, for example, another form that was entered by one of our attendees, if you do as I did and click submit without entering any information, I get this huge, great red list of things that I've done wrong at the top of the form. Now, this isn't the nicest way to try and help a user complete this process anyway, but there's an additional problem with this form in particular, and that's the fact that it's a pretty long single page form. So when I scroll down to the rest of the form, I can't see what errors I've made at all. So I keep having to scroll back up to the list and then back down to the field itself to find out what I did wrong. Now, obviously, a far superior way to do this is to display it in some way associated with the field where I've made an error. And this is just me sticking some, proposed error messages next to it, but we can also see some fantastic examples. I think this is, in fact, from Apple's one. So they've told me that my postcode is not a valid entry. Please check that the information is correct. It's pretty nice language. It's associated with the field. It's told me exactly where I've got wrong and what I need to do to correct it. So here are some other good examples. The phone number field. So whilst I said be as forgiving as possible, if that's too tough for you to do in your particular situation, you can simply say that this entry can only contain numbers. That's the top left one. And it's picked out that there are some dashes in there, and those should be removed. A great one in the bottom left is to do with entering emails and passwords. Obviously, somebody has tried to enter a email as a password. The form itself has detected that information and simply told me that they can't be the same. So it's a really helpful error message. And the Amazon one is on the right, and I've already covered that. And these ones were done by the Baymard Institute. Incidentally, I'm going to stick some resources at the end of the webinar. Everyone will be sent the recording of it, but we'll also link to a slide share, so be able to read some of the research that went into some of these thoughts. And the fourth one is something as well that we at Formisimo see all the time. So just forms that are asking too much information of their users given what they're offering them. And a prime example of that is the next slide. So you can see this is, again, a registration form for an e-commerce site that you're required to complete before buying anything from them. It asks for, well, actually 3 separate phone numbers, but the key field that I was looking at was the date of birth, and it's a required field. Now, they do well in a sense because they ask, well, there's a little link to why do we ask for this, which you can see. But this is a prime example of having the most amount of information about your users that you can to help you segment your customers, to change your marketing language and approach based on that information, but then also weighing that up against the importance of making it easy for people to complete your checkout process. Now, we've actually got some real data taken from Formisimo for this particular field. So you can see roughly for a 16-day period, that date of birth field caused 844 people to drop off. In just over 2 weeks, which is obviously a vast number of people. So 36% of all the drop offs that happened in this registration process happened because of that one bit of information. Then the conversation completely changes. It's less about what's nice, and it becomes about, right, is date of birth worth almost 900 people in a 2-week period? And the answer is usually no. So again, this is a great example of the real data from your actual visitors, your actual users, your actual customers, leading the way in terms of designing your formal checkout. Now, I've always loved this this sort of mantra by Carol and Jarrett, and this is for every form. For every form field that you have in your checkout process, go through this sort of, well, assign each of them one of these. So either cut it, and that's the number one priority, keep it if you absolutely have to, or think about whether or not you could get that information at a latter stage. So if they're a first-time buyer from your site, ignore date of birth, but if they're signing in for the second time, could you ask more information from them then? And if you do have to keep it, and it is something that might be considered too personal information, explain why you're asking for that information in a reassuring way. Now, the last thing I wanted to talk about in terms of themes is coupon codes. So you see these everywhere. They're used as often a marketing tool to get undecided buyers or new buyers or bargain hunters onto your site and through the checkout process in a greater quantity than if you didn't have these coupon codes. So I picked out NetFlorist here, so a website that was submitted for today. They've got a fairly prominent voucher code that you can redeem before you get, well, so once you get to the order summary point. Now, at this point, me looking at this, I would immediately put myself in a visitor's shoes. And indeed, I've done this a ton of times. But just a quick stat before I describe what the next steps would be is a well-paced study in 2013 found that 20% of shoppers have abandoned an online checkout to look for a coupon and have never come back. So if we go back to the NetFlorist coupon voucher code, as they've got here, I use those interchangeably, coupon code and voucher code. My immediate response is to open up a new tab and type in NetFlorist discount voucher. Now, as you can see, none of the top results are NetFlorist itself. So you're immediately inviting users to go to another person's website that you have zero control over and find out what's there. Now, it may well be that they're offering a legitimate NetFlorist coupon code, but I've picked out in the next slide. So this is an extreme coupon site based in South Africa, often a NetFlorist coupon code. But what you can see on the right is a list of other coupon codes, which may be competitors to NetFlorist. And you're almost inviting people to leave your site for as long as possible to find the biggest discount they possibly can, and also giving them ample opportunity to find other sites or simply get distracted and think, well, okay, flowers were just an impulse buy, but actually if I get this other thing with this massive discount, I could do that today. So it can be incredibly risky. There are some ways in which you can approach this problem to kind of reduce cart abandonment. So Apple do this really well, and how they do that is by sort of changing the prominence of the discount code. And what they do is on their checkout, they make it a very, very tiny link in the bottom left-hand side that just says enter promo code. Now, if you have one of these codes before coming to the Apple site, there is literally no way you're not going to find this. You're going to be actively looking for it. But if you've already made your buying decision and you're going through the checkout process, there's a chance that you might not see it. So I thought this was a really neat way to try and counteract that phenomenon. There's some other ways. So make it less visible is point 2 there. That's what Apple do. If you have a discount code codes out there, but you know that you limit them to certain affiliate sites, you can make the coupon code field only appear if they come via an affiliate link. So for everyone else who came to your site directly or through other marketing channels, you simply just don't give them that option because they were probably going to buy anyway. You can publish your own. So I've seen Puma do this. So if you go looking for them, they're on Puma's website. They often stick them on the homepage. I know when Usain Bolt won the 100 meters gold in Beijing, they gave everybody 10% off all of their running shoes. I think the code was something like Usain Bolt. It was a very, very nice touch. And another very subtle thing to try out is just to try different labels. For the coupon code. So as an example, coupon code applies that anyone can have them and that they're readily available out there on the web. So, but stuff like gift voucher code or voucher code if you have one in brackets are slightly more tentative in terms of assuring the user that they're not just out there by their thousands and you can go and hunt them down. And that's about it. So 25 minutes. I managed to come in under the half an hour. I hope those were some useful tips that you've taken a few tips and tricks that you can take away from you with you for your websites. Would love to answer any questions that you might have. As I said, I've also got the resource list at the end of this that you're more than welcome to read some of the research and articles that went into this webinar. We'll send you across the recording. Please feel free to send that to anyone you like, and we'll of course be doing more of these in the future. So I don't think I can see any questions coming through, so I'll happily wrap it up. I thank you very much, everyone. Yep, I just thought I'd wait a couple more seconds for questions to come through, but obviously I've answered everything, which is fantastic news. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us, and we hope to see you at our next webinar. Thanks.